The Quick, Cold Death of Freedom on Tuesday Evening by Wayne Harry Johnson, Jr., read by Alex Gallick. Copyright 2020. Robert woke up on a very cold January morning. It was Tuesday. His new short story was going to be published by his favorite online magazine, the West Gate Magazine. He leaped from his bed and hurried to his computer tucked away in the corner of his bedroom and turned it on. Then Robert trotted downstairs and started the coffee. He heard the chime of his computer telling him it was ready and rushed back upstairs. He quickly typed in his password and then typed it again until finally the old machine started up. The smell of fresh brewed coffee lured him back downstairs. Later, with a full hot cup of coffee and a slice of cinnamon toast, he quickly navigated to the magazine's landing page. Where was it? He quickly scrolled down. At the bottom, after the ad for bleach, Robert saw it, the link to his short story. He paused for a moment as he enjoyed seeing his name next to the word author. Finally, he really was an author. Then, after a few sips of coffee, he clicked the link and his story filled the screen along with ads for toilet paper and hand sanitizer. Scrolling through, he caught a typo. Damn it. He checked the original he sent to the magazine, and sure enough, he had missed it. Oh well. Now that he was a real author, he was sure he'd be able to hire an editor to help him on the next one. Robert copied the link to his story and began sharing it on all of his social media channels. First, there was no response. Then, the dings and the likes slowly began. First was his pal Tomas, whom Robert had texted until late into the night about his fears that his story wouldn't get published. Tomas posted, "See, I told you, buddy. Way to go!" Over the next few hours, Robert watched as all of his regular friends give him a like or a quick attaboy. Even his mom managed to share the story with her 5 other friends. By lunchtime, he was up to 30 likes, the most of any of his posts had ever received. A little proud of himself, Robert finally decided it was time for a shower and some real food. He turned on his radio and hopped into the shower. His favorite song came on and he spent a few extra minutes washing his hair and singing aloud. Robert had gone to the store the night before and purchased his favorite steak, a ribeye. Originally his plan was to cook it to celebrate, but decided instead to make it for lunch. He put the steak on a plate with some salt and pepper while he waited for his broiler to warm up before placing it and setting his timer for 7 minutes. His phone rang. Robert answered it. It was his brother, who quickly congratulated him and then reminded him that he needed to help move that junk out of his garage next weekend. Robert clumsily flipped his steak as they said their goodbyes. As soon as he hung up, the phone rang again. This time it was Tomas, who told Robert the story was really getting attention and that he should look at the comments. Robert hung up the phone and ran to his computer. He navigated back to the magazine page to see that his story had moved from the bottom to the main story. He held his breath as he scrolled down to the comment section. 100, he said to himself. The first few comments were typical internet comments. The occasional random spams and a few of the regular, "I hate this," and "you are dumb." But as he read on, the comments turned into serious insight about his story and how it seemed to ring true. People were liking it. Then the fire alarm rang out. "My steak," Robert said to himself as he ran downstairs to the oven and pulled out his charbroiled blackened steak. It was inedible. While Robert waved a towel around his living room to clear the smoke, his phone rang again. He grabbed it and pulled the cord along into the garage and knocked over a spool of red wire. It just missed his toes. The voice on the other end was the magazine publisher. Robert's story has had over 1 million views and is being shared with all of the major writing and entertainment sites across the country and even in Europe. Robert was stunned. He had no idea what to say. He thanked the publisher, walking back into the kitchen and slowly hung up the phone. Then he opened the fridge, pulled out a celebration beer he was going to drink with his steak. He drank it all. Sitting at his computer, he hesitated to look at the comments. It was over 1,000 just on the magazine site, but other places had even more. He finally started to read them around 3 in the afternoon. By 4 in the afternoon, the comments had changed in tone. Some had hundreds of thread responses that ranged every topic: religion, politics, cooking. He even found one that spun into an in-depth discussion about vampires. Then his email beeped at him. He looked. It wasn't an address he recognized. Robert opened it. It contained one word: racist. He was a bit confused, and then noticed his spam filter had over 200 new messages in the last hour. Scrolling through the comments, he read the subject lines: asshole, woman hater, racist, homophobe, xenophobic, and so on. And the newest one threatened his life. What was happening? He checked his other social channels, and all of the comments had turned into attacks directed at him. The phone rang as his email exploded. Someone had just published his email address and phone number on a thread. He quickly flagged the post and sent an email to the administrator. Moments later, it was gone. He walked down to answer the phone. It was his mother. She wanted to know what he said in his story to make people so angry. She hadn't read it. She was afraid to, but she was reading the comments on his profile page and was sure Robert had done something wrong. He assured her that his story was just a regular story about a man living a regular life. There wasn't a cuss word, a mention of sex or violence in the whole thing. It was just a story. No politics, no religion, nothing of any controversy. He didn't understand how people could be calling him all of those hateful things. His mom hung up the phone, crying. Robert called Tomas. No answer. Scratching his head, he walked back up to his computer to see what was happening. His email was flooded with over 3,000 new emails. All were very angry. The newest one simply read, Nazi. He clicked around some more and found a site that had a link to a PDF, and he vaguely recognized the title. Curious, he opened it. To Robert's surprise, it was a very old story of his that he wrote in college. He had totally forgotten about it. As he read, he remembered why he had written it. It was an exercise his instructor had them do. Write a story based on a song. He chose the sublime song Eben. Oh, Robert said aloud. He frantically flagged the post and quickly wrote a response that it was a college assignment he did over 20 years ago. But it was too late. The PDF had been shared over 1,000 times already. He closed the email browser. It was 5 in the evening. The doorbell rang. A confused Robert quickly pulled on his shirt and pants and went to the door. A woman stood in his doorway. She was very beautiful. He was taken aback by her smile. It was the biggest, brightest smile he had seen in his life. What would such an amazingly beautiful woman be doing on a cold January evening at his doorstep? She spoke calmly and direct. Hello, Robert. I am Rachel, and I am a reporter for the City Times. Have you heard of us? Robert stopped, then sputtered out an answer. Yes, I usually read it for the food reviews. She smiled and pulled out a small tape recorder. Why would you write something so intolerant and hateful? Robert looked at Rachel. Your story has underpinnings of the patriarchal institution and is extremely non-inclusive. There are no women, no people of color, no mention of LGBT community. How could you publish something like this? Robert stepped back. Somehow this beautiful woman became even more attractive as she lashed out at him. But he was confused, and for the first time that day, Robert was frightened. I really don't understand. There is no racism or bigotry or any of those things in my story. It's about a man and his day. There isn't even a mention of his race or sexuality. It is not important to the story. He is just a regular man on a regular day. There is no violence or sex or hateful words mentioned. I don't understand what's wrong. If you are not speaking out against hate and intolerance, then you are actually promoting hate and intolerance. Silence is violence. She spoke so fast that Robert almost didn't understand her. He slowly responded, "That makes no sense. My story isn't about that. It's about a man and his day. He doesn't hate anyone." "So you are denying you are a Nazi," she responded. "A Nazi? Are you kidding me? Is this a real question?" Robert slowly started to back into his house and began to close the door. Rachel shoved her recorder in his face. "What about this story? Isn't this yours?" Robert looked. Of course, it was the college story. Everyone in the world has seen that now. With his last bit of courage, Robert asked, "Did you read it?" He was so terrified now that it hurt his insides. She was no longer attractive to him. Now he was repulsed. "I read enough," Rachel responded. "Well, if you actually read it, you will see there is a paragraph at the bottom that explains it is an assignment. I did that in college 20 years ago. The door was almost shut now. So you've always been a Nazi." Rachel belched as the door shut and locked. Robert stood there, with his back to the door, stunned. A creeping sense of paranoia filled him. He immediately ran and locked every window, making sure the curtains were closed tight, his phone ringing out of the whole time. He finally answered it. "Die, fucker." He hung up. It immediately rang again. Robert was subjected to every type of vile remark one could think of, including threats on his life. He hung the phone up for the 10th time, and then it rang again. In tears and frustration, he lashed out. Then he heard a familiar voice. It was his mother. She was frantic. "They want to kill me, Robert! What did you do? What did you do?" She screamed at him over and over. Slowly, with his mother's voice echoing through his kitchen, he hung up the phone. It started ringing again, and he went up to his room and sat at his computer. Robert glanced at his email. It was like he was in a trance now. The top 3 emails were death threats, but the 4th was from his publisher. The phone rang relentlessly as he clicked it. It was a message from their lawyer. They were discontinuing payment for his story. It was being unpublished. They would no longer be working with him, and that they would be suing Robert for damages. The sound of his phone ringing slowly died out as Robert stood up and fainted. About 20 minutes later, Robert came to. His only luck that day was that he actually fainted right onto his bed. The phone had stopped ringing and his computer had gone to sleep, but a new, unfamiliar sound began to grow louder as he regained his senses. It was outside. He crept over to the window and peeked out. The street below was filled with cars and people. There were people with signs. There were people with candles. There were people wearing masks. There were people without masks. There were people fighting. And then he heard the chanting. "No hate, no hate, Robert must leave Westgate," they all chanted, along with "Die, fucker!" and "Racist pig!" and "Kill all haters!" Robert was out of emotions now. He went slowly downstairs and peeked out a window. The police had formed a line at the end of the street, but his yard was filled with people. Some with torches, some with clubs, some arguing, some fighting, some holding swastikas, some with the hammer and sickle. All of them were very angry, all of them yelling hateful words at one another and at Robert's house. The whole street felt like hate. The phone rang out. Robert wasn't even startled this time. There was no startle left in him. He picked it up. "Yes," he said dryly. It was his boss. "Robert, we are letting you go. We can't be associated with someone who embodies negative ideals." "Okay, I understand," was all he said, and hung up. He grabbed another of his celebration beers and drank it all. Then he stepped into the garage and grabbed the spool of red wire and walked up to his bathroom. 2 weeks later, when the police finally decided to check on Robert, they found his house was completely frozen inside. The power had been off, and the temperature was below zero. A letter from the power company was tacked to the front door and simply read, "Service disconnected," and scrawled at the bottom was "No hate." The place resonated a sense of peace. After 2 hours and a broken ankle, the police managed to climb the icy steps. The floor of the hallway and the bedroom were covered in 3 inches of ice. They half walked, half skated into the bathroom where they found Robert. He hung from the showerhead pipe with a red wire tied around his neck. The pipe had broken under his weight and encased him in a thick block of ice. The end. Author's note. As an artist and a filmmaker, there is nothing dearer to me than the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. Without this fundamental, and I believe divine, right, there can be no true freedom. Our freedom comes with a price, and that price is that we may hear ideas that we do not love, and hear some that are downright disgusting. But that is the price. The marketplace of ideas must always be open to everyone and every idea. Let the full light of day and reason shine down on it to see if it is true or not. History has shown us where the road of censorship leads, and it is a quick, cold road to the gulag, or worse. This has been a dramatic reading of The Quick, Cold Death of Freedom on Tuesday Evening, read by Alex Gallick, story by Wayne Harry Johnson, Jr.